Okay. Thank you, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce our next two speakers, Carli Spina from the Fashion Institute of Technology and Rebecca Oling from SUNY Purchase. And the topic is integrating accessibility into database procurement processes. Thank you to our speakers.
Okay, I'm just going to share my slides.
Well, that's being done. There's an announcement in the chat to everyone that a reminder for those who want to see captions separate. There is a bit.ly for the captioning service, bit.ly/A11Y_feedback. Oh,
Are
that's
you
for the
seeing my
feedback form.
slides okay?
Yes, we are. Thank you.
Perfect. So hi all, I'm Rebecca Oling from SUNY Purchase. My title is Director of Digital Accessibility, which basically means it's an aspirational position to try to ensure that everything that we do at the library is accessible for our students. And I'm here with Carli Spina from SUNY FIT, and Carli will introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Carli Spina, and I'm the head of Research and Instructional Services at the FIT Library. And today we're going to be talking about a project that Rebecca and I both worked on with all of our colleagues at SUNY. And SUNY is the State University of New York system. And we worked on a project about database and e-resource procurement processes. And next slide, Rebecca. This project started off with several initial goals. We really wanted to, this started right around the same time as everyone was moving to remote for COVID. And it was also around the same time, a little bit after, SUNY had adopted their electronic and information technologies accessibility policy language. And that was to make sure that across the State University of New York system, not just in libraries, but everywhere, our electronic and information technologies were accessible to users. And as part of that, the library wanted to make sure that we were making our e-resources accessible to our students and start thinking about that more as an entire system. We're lucky to have libraries at 64 different campuses. And we also have a system-wide office, SUNY OLIS, that works with libraries. And they were a big driving force in starting this group as well, with Shannon Pritting taking a big role in that in the initial steps when he was at that office. And we had some initial goals of evaluating e-resources, but we also wanted to build community around accessibility, develop this community's accessibility skills, create a generalizable process that not just members of this community could use, but also that we could share with others at SUNY and more widely, so that they would be able to test their e-resources, even if they weren't necessarily able to commit the staff time to participating in this group. We also wanted to document and share best practices more generally so that as new e-resources emerge, people will be able to do that as well. And I'll use my institution as an example here. I work at the Fashion Institute of Technology. We are a fashion, art, design, business school. And so we have a lot of specialized resources that other campuses as part of this system may not have. And we really wanted a process that would allow the group, the SUNY-wide group, to work on e-resources that were held by many different campuses while creating a process that individual schools could apply to test resources that only their school had potentially. And we also wanted to share this with the wider SUNY community to raise awareness. A lot of our institutions, as with many libraries, don't have someone whose role is focused on accessibility. In fact, my role is not focused on accessibility. And so we wanted to make sure that even if a school didn't have a member of this group, they again were going to have access to resources they could use to ensure accessibility. So next slide, please. we had to think about our cohort structure. And this is where I'm going to try to multitask and share some things in the chat at the same time. So we'll see if that works very well. But we looked to a few different organizations as we were doing this. And I think there are other important library accessibility collaborations that your organization could look at if this is something you're interested in doing after hearing about our work. We looked at the Library Accessibility Alliance and the work that they're doing. They actually, as a group, come together. There are over 100 different colleges and universities that are a part of this group. And they come together and mostly hire third parties to do VPAT reviews. And so they'll actually hire a consultant to do that type of review. They'll post it publicly, and then vendors have a structure through which they can respond to that. And they provide access to those vendor responses, to the third-party VPAT reviews, and to other professional development resources on their website available to everyone. They've also created and shared model language, for example, for contracts and those sorts of things, which is also really, really useful. So next up, we also looked to CUNY, and I'm going to put that in the chat next. And they have a guide that they maintain, which is a VPAT repository. And they have on that same page best practices for both e-resources and OER. And they include software platforms that are used in higher education as well as databases. So that makes their VPAT repository a little bit different than a lot of the other ones that are out there and very useful as a place to find these VPATs. Though they don't do as much with sharing any sort of evaluation of the VPAT. So there's not as much that they have shared on that site as Library Accessibility Alliance of independent verification of the VPATs. And then the third organization, which was emerging around the same time as SUNY was putting together this group, was LEAP, the Library e-Resources Accessibility Portal. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well. And that's directed by College and Libraries Ontario, supported by the Ontario College Library Services. And it publicly shares assessment documentation created by partner organizations with almost 200 resources available. And in addition to this assessment documentation about e-resources, it also has a lot of training materials, including videos that focus on helping people get up to speed with wave testing. So as we were thinking about these sorts of organizations that were in existence in other big groups of libraries, we wanted to think about how we could assemble our team in an effective way. So we wanted to try to assemble a SUNY-wide team. SUNY has a lot of different types of campuses. So for example, my campus I mentioned is an art, design, and business school. It's also a community college. There are art schools that are part of this, performing arts schools, for example. There are also business schools, medical schools, liberal arts schools, STEM-focused schools, and we had representatives from lots of different types of campuses that we wanted to find and recruit to this team. We also wanted to provide some structured training. We knew a lot of the members were going to come in with an interest in accessibility, but not necessarily a lot of experience or confidence in doing this type of testing. A lot of us felt very much questioning our own ability to verify whether a VPAT was correct when we first started in the group. We also wanted to develop a testing process that would work for everyone. So we wanted to think about something that was approachable. We didn't want it to be something that was so time consuming that people would feel they wouldn't have time for it. We knew we weren't necessarily going to be able to create a process that found every single issue that an e-resource might have, but instead we wanted to find ways to make something that would be fast enough to be practical and something that would then be something people could work into their day. And we wanted to offer paired testing to start with. So everyone worked in pairs when they were initially doing their testing. And after they gained more confidence, they could then take that paired testing experience and go back and do either individual testing for things that were held at many SUNY campuses or individual testing for platforms that were unique to their campus. Next slide, please. Oh, Rebecca, next slide. Thanks. So we ended up sharing everything on the LibGuide featured here. And this is on the SpringShare LibGuides platform. It's on the SUNY Office of Library and Information Services site. And this is part of their general accessibility and LSLS page. There's a subsection of it in the menu to the left pictured here that says Library Procurement Accessibility Toolkit. And that's the part that this group worked on. Today, we're going to be focusing on our best practices for reviewing VPATs, but we worked on a lot of other information too. There's training material here. There's a lot that we did that was model communication that you could offer to vendors. So what's the email you would send if you want to request a VPAT? What's the email you would send if you want to say this platform isn't accessible enough? What's the email you would send it to say a user had a problem? We wanted to have some examples that people could start from so that they felt like they could just use a model email and work from there for their specific situation. Next slide, please. So going into more depth about this VPAT review process, again, we wanted to make it something that could really fit into a person's day pretty easily. So we started with a two-part process. The first was really just looking at the VPAT itself. You didn't start any testing during this first part. And these were actually forms for the group. Anybody could use them individually, but for this group, they were forms that you submitted and then they were shared with everyone. So we had a form that you could submit answering these specific questions for each platform. And the first form asked, is the VPAT current and up to date? Was it completed in-house by the vendor, or did they hire a third-party consultant, or did you find this, say, for example, on the Library Accessibility Alliance website, where a third party hired a third-party consultant to then do an outside evaluation? Does it demonstrate that the vendor takes accessibility seriously if it was created by the vendor? So for example, sometimes you'll encounter a VPAT that is quite out of date. Sometimes you'll encounter one that has very minimal information. And sometimes that might give you a sense of the amount that the vendor has taken into account accessibility, I guess is a way of saying it. Are any comments or notes thorough and clear? So what we mean by that is that on the VPAT, there's the opportunity, if something is inaccessible, or even if it is accessible, to offer more information about how they're either meeting that standard or not meeting that particular WCAG success criteria. So we wanted to know, did they have notations that would be helpful as part of the VPAT? Also, what level of accessibility WCAG, if being what we mostly looked at, does it indicate the platform achieves? So is it level 1? Is it level 2? Is it level 3? And at first review, does it appear accurate? So this was something where we didn't want people to do a lot of testing, but sometimes you might know that they just rolled out a new platform and the date on this makes it clear that this is the old platform. That's sort of a little bit of a, okay, we need to do a deeper dive on this more quickly. Next slide, please. So then there was a second form, and this is when you started actually doing verification testing. So in this second form, you would test for and evaluate alt text. You would go in and look for alternative text that described effectively images. And this was important because, as I'm sure many of you know, automated testing can only tell if there is alt text, not whether or not it's any good. So we wanted people to go in and take a look at a few examples of alt text, not every single image, but to see whether or not it was unique, specific to the image, not just the file name, something that would actually be meaningful and useful to the user. We wanted them to next check for and evaluate captions, transcripts, and audio descriptions if there was video or audio content, to again make sure that it wasn't just checking the box, but that it was actually somewhat accurate in at least a couple of examples, not necessarily every video again. We wanted to test for assistive technology compatibility. And at this point, we asked that people actually use a screen reader to navigate the content, knowing that a novice screen reader user is not going to be able to do the level of testing that an expert user would, but wanting to at least check to see if we are going to have some basic knowledge that this is compatible with screen readers and not causing immediate issues. Evaluate color contrast to again make sure that it's passing the color contrast standards. Test keyboard navigation, and the form itself included some tips on how to do that. check for flashing content that might be a problem for someone who has epilepsy. The next slide, please. And then evaluate some of the more structural things, like evaluating the predictability of navigation and content layout to make sure that it would be usable for people, to test input assistance, and to review compatibility with a variety of different browsers, tools, and technologies. Next, I'll pass it to Rebecca.
Hi all, thanks Carly. So what went well? What went really well for us, especially at the time of the lockdown, when a lot of us were struggling with isolation, was that we really did create a community, and we were able to collaborate together towards a common goal. We also were able to increase people's confidence. So most of the people who were involved in this really had no digital accessibility training whatsoever. And so this was really an effort to get them comfortable at a very base level with it. We were not expecting people to become experts, but we wanted people to be supported in that goal. So we were also able to leverage our networks with the same goal. So for some of us, we were, within SUNY, we have the larger system. So having each other throughout that system, looking at the Library Accessibility Alliance and what they did, how could we leverage those networks and see what we could use as models for ourselves? And obviously the SUNY support, as I mentioned, having that larger system was invaluable for us. We had the benefit of a system-wide license for DQ University. DQ University, for those of you who don't know it, is a platform where you can do individualized training for digital accessibility issues, and you can get a certificate for those modules which are self-paced. So we asked people to sign up for them. We had people do them. We talked about them, what was good, what was bad. We actually gave feedback to DQ over time. And then SLS, which is the SUNY library system, helped with our testing and our reviews. So we didn't do it all by ourselves. We had actual staff helping us and guiding us throughout this process. So what could be better? Given the fact that it was a very difficult time and most people were working sort of 3 jobs and trying to take care of their homes and everything, what could be better? I think that the time issue was definitely something that we needed to hone in on. How much time did we expect people to take to get this baseline of skills and understanding? We recognize that some vendors still lag behind accessibility standards, and it was important for us to have feedback and have a path forward for our members and for the rest of the SUNY community. So what do you do when you have a vendor that's not moving forward? And I think the other problem for us was, the turnover at that time. People were dropping out, schools were scaling back, temporary staff were, furloughed. So there was a lot going on and there was a lot of turnover. So getting people back into the cohort to be active members was something that was important. For our future priorities, obviously, we are now looking at revising our SUNY library procurement toolkit, which Carly showed you earlier, to make sure that everything is in compliance with the new ADA rules. For example, one of the things that we focused on in the first round was making sure we had an exception process. The new ADA rule does not really allow for an exception. And so how are we going to be contextualizing that for our members? And how are we communicating our best practices across SUNY? We have had expanding training opportunities. We have had some of the cohort members actually publish. Carly and I recently published a handbook on digital accessibility in libraries for ALA. We had, she also published with some of the cohort members a study on library websites and how much accessibility information is on there. So those are some ways, obviously, of communicating practices. We have representatives who go to local conferences. For example, we didn't immediately have somebody who had proposed sessions for next week's SUNY Law, and we asked our group to please step up and make sure that somebody could be there to ensure that there is accessibility constantly on the table for librarians within our position. And then And then expanding those training opportunities, making sure that people know about DQ and are utilizing it, but we also have SUNY Inclusion Quest and a few other things. So our recommendations are baseline to create a supportive environment. That was the most important thing throughout the pandemic, but that persists, that people still need that. There's a lot of imposter syndrome when you're dealing with digital accessibility. Supporting multiple tools and methods. SUNY is now looking at how could we leverage tools like AI and make those available to our faculty or our librarians specifically for the purpose of increasing digital accessibility across the board. How can we balance the structure of the cohort with flexibility and limit the loads? So Carli and I talked a lot about ensuring that assignments that we gave to people were 20 to 30 minutes top, so they didn't have a lot of homework getting back into the group and it wasn't too intimidating. And we want to make sure that, people build in time for that confidence building, working in pairs, documenting your work and sharing it. It's the sort of medical model of, learn one, see one, learn one, teach one. And so we tried to do that for confidence building as well. And we document our work and we try to share it widely with the rest of SUNY. Okay, thank you.
Hi, everyone. So I saw that there's already a question in the Q&A, so I can go ahead and answer that. The person asked, how much can we trust an ACR/VPAT? Should we use in-house or contract support to verify accessibility? Should those testers be people with disabilities who use assistive technology? So to start with the first question about how much can we trust ACRs or VPATs, there's actually been some research about this, and they're not always accurate. There's research that shows that there's older research that shows that they used to be quite inaccurate. More than half, I think, in the one study that was from, I want to say like 2017, were not accurate. But I've seen some newer research and newer claims that they're getting more accurate. And I do think that's in line with my general sense that vendors are devoting more time and more knowledge to accessibility. So to answer, I'll let obviously Rebecca answer this from her point of view as well, but from my point of view about the next two questions, should we use in-house or contract support to verify? And should those testers be people with disabilities who use assistive technologies? I think that it's really great to verify if possible. And ideally, it would be great to be able to pay experts who are people with disabilities who use assistive technologies and therefore are true expert users of these, but that's not always necessarily something that individual libraries are going to be able to afford. And I think that one of the things I think is really important is not to get lost in that. So if you think, oh, I can't afford this, so I'm not going to do anything, that becomes a problem. If you can't afford that realistically right now, take some steps forward. And that's why I think we tried to make it really approachable to do some testing. What I think you'll find when you start looking at these, in my experience, a lot of times, even that first step of just looking at the VPAT will tell you a lot about it. If almost nothing is actually filled out, maybe you need to do a little bit more testing. If they've really notated carefully in every single success criteria how it does or does not apply, what any known issues are, then maybe you don't need to do as much of verification as quickly. And you still want to try to get to the point, I think, of looking at everything eventually, but I do think that even that easy first step can help a lot. But Rebecca, what do you think?
Yeah, I was going to say caveat emptor, right? Like, be careful what you're buying and make sure that you are testing it. What I would say is it's a best practice to use people with disabilities to do testing. You can't do that without paying them. For a long time, that was happening at a lot of libraries, and that's taking advantage of them in a way that is unfair. So you need to pay them for their expertise and labor, just as you would any other consultant. And not every library has the ability to do that. I think the automated tools are wonderful for helping nudge us in the right direction, but I think all of us need to know a base level of some testing techniques so that we can verify what vendors vendors are saying. And I would say that they're not always accurate. They don't always recognize when they make a platform change, right? A simple change can really infuse a lot of barriers that you're not expecting. So I think it is important to test and verify. I think it is important to use persons with disabilities if and when you can pay them. And I think that, we have to be careful about the assumptions we make. One of the things I've learned throughout this process is open educational resources, just because they're open in terms of permission, doesn't necessarily mean that they're accessible either. So whatever you're adopting, whether it's a database or an open educational resource, you need to do some base level testing with it.
Thank you. And I see there's one more question in the chat, but because of time, maybe Carli and Rebecca, if you could answer that in the Q&A module.
Sure, I can do that.
Great, thank you, everyone.